Introducing the science of popularity, winning the multi-platform game, featuring Warren Seger, CEO, Parrot Analytics, interviewed by Variety's Andrew Wallenstein.
All right, thank you very much. My name is Warren, and for those of you who aren't really familiar with what we do, we study and apply the science of popularity. It's a really complex science, and it's going to be an action-packed ride, so strap in. But let's start with something simple. Hands up if you think you know what the top 5 most popular TV shows in the US today across all platforms. See, it's I was expecting like 10% of people. That was literally 0%. So do you want to give it another try? Hands up? No? All right. So I think that's a really telling sign, though, of our time, is that as an industry, we can't answer a seemingly simple question, right? And that's just the tip of the iceberg. That's just the start of it. So let's just quickly recap how we got here. So we're seeing a really rapid proliferation of content distribution platforms, right? Now there are thousands, literally thousands of OTT platforms around the world. Audiences are now more fragmented than ever across all these platforms, which means our ability to measure these audiences is becoming more and more complex with every passing day. And again, this is happening at a global scale. So we can probably all, or at least most of us in the room, agree that we need to shift away from, and we have been shifting away from, the traditional survey and panel-based approach to measurement towards a more empirical way of really understanding our audiences, right? And at the heart of that is this relationship. It's the relationship between consumers and content, right? And this relationship is becoming more and more nuanced in quantifiable ways. What do I mean in quantifiable ways? Well, whether a particular consumer expresses demand for, say, a TV show or a movie depends on so many different factors, right? Like they could be fans of the star of the movie, Kevin Hart, or they can be fans of the franchise of the TV show, et cetera. There's music and genres and subgenres and so on and so forth. But all of these are internal characteristics of a piece of content, say a TV show, right? These are the internal factors of success, which we call the genome of the content, right? It's the content's genetic makeup. But content success doesn't just depend on its genetic makeup. Much like living organisms, say human beings, like your genetic makeup actually has less impact on your success in life than environmental factors. There's been a bunch of longitudinal studies proving that where you're born, your family socioeconomic status, the people you surround yourself with actually have more impact on your propensity to succeed than the genetic makeup. And so similarly, in content, that content's genome actually plays a relatively small part in a wide environment that has a bunch of environmental factors that also impact the content's success. And so that's what I mean by the science of popularity, right? It's quantifying this. It's quantifying the relationship between the environmental factors that decide or impact a piece of content's success, as well as the internal genetic makeup of a piece of content. We'll dive into what it means, but let's just start with the basic question. What is popularity, right? How do we even define what is popular in this day and age? And the reason no one put their hand up is because what is even popular in this day and age, right? Like if I ask a bunch of linear network people, they'll say, oh, what rates well? That's what's popular for us, right? Because we live and die by our linear ratings. If you ask an SVOD platform, for them it's all about subscriber growth, subscriber retention. They couldn't care less about the linear ratings of the environment around them. And yet we need a global measure that helps us understand what content is working where and why, right? And so our solution to this, to help us advance the science, is this concept of demand for content. So what we went out and did is said, how do people express their demand for content? And let's capture as much of that as possible, right? So whether I research a TV show, whether I watch a trailer about it before I decide to consume it, whether I check it out on a fan or critic rating site, or read about it on Wikipedia, whether I pirate it, whether I talk about it on social media or blog about it, all of these are different signals of my demand for that piece of content, right? And they all mean different things. So step 1, let's go out and capture as many of these signals as possible, right? And step 2, let's actually combine everything together. Because they all mean different things, and let's filter out the noise. For example, we can all agree that if I watch a full episode of a TV show, that's a stronger indication of my demand for that TV show than if I press like on his Facebook page or comment on social media. And so let's combine all the signals, and let's weight them accordingly. And let's have a system that now processes over 1 billion data points a day in over 100 languages that helps us quantify how popular content is in every country on the planet. So what this really now allows us to do is, one, measure what content is working, where, and why. And more importantly, give us the tools to understand how we can influence it, understand the nuances of why specifically that piece of content is working or not working, right? And how it relates to environment in any given market or any given platform. So, and that's really important, right? Because the business is changing so rapidly that our technology and our science need to equally rapidly evolve as well. So I'll give some examples. So macro trends that everyone here is more familiar with than anyone out there, so we won't spend too much time over them, but rise of SVOD platforms. Over the past 4 years, between Netflix, Amazon, and Hulu, a 2.8x increase in their content spend. Over the same time period, their subscriber base have also increased by exactly 2.8x. Most of that money is going towards original content, as we know, but quantity isn't everything. It's also about quality. When we map the demand for Hulu's content against their subscriber numbers, we see a direct correlation. And these are one of the applications of having a measurement system that allows us to understand the true empirical popularity of content, is that we understand what is happening with these platforms, what the ROI is on content investment and where you should invest your money in and how you should market that content and so on. Audiences are discovering content in new, different ways. So yes, of course, there's traditional, old-fashioned word of mouth and so on. But online, social media is now #1 method where how people discover content in most of the English-speaking markets. Online browsing, home screen recommendations of OTT platforms in some markets are the #1 way of how people discover new content, right? And so as an industry and as marketers, we need to adapt to that and think about, well, how do we influence that? How do we influence the success of our content given these new dynamics and how they're changing? In the US, it's actually even more pronounced than the rest of the world. There's a 20% more discoverability of content on social media than in other places. Peer-to-peer file sharing websites. People in the US discover content on that, again, more than they do in other countries. And this is happening across a range of different platforms, right? This is the percentage of social users on each of these platforms that also exist on another platform. And what this shows you is the overlap may not necessarily be there, right? So you can't have presence necessarily in just a single platform. And equally, you can't just use the metrics of a single platform to drive your overall strategy and success. So online TV is coming to the living room. TV is not going anywhere, right? Yes, as mobile viewing is increasing. Yes, tablets and smartphone, all of that is increasing. But your TV is not going anywhere anytime soon. Last year, YouTube had 100 million hours of content streamed on connected TVs. Netflix says 70% of all streams end up on connected TVs. People sign up to the service on their laptop. They sign up on their desktop or their mobile. 6 months later, 70% of all their consumption happens on TV. This is happening across all genres, right? In particularly kids content, but across all genres. Now, traditional players, what are they doing about it? Well, they're joining the online universe, right? There's a whole host of traditional players that are coming online. Linear networks are reducing drastically over the next few years their ads per hour, right, to compete for consumer attention. And all of this is happening in an increasingly complex industry, right? An industry that's globalized, one, right? So people now, content is crossing borders. People are all around the world. They're pulling the content they want whenever they want it, however they want it, right? Regardless of how you window it and when you release it in a certain market or so on. If it's available out there, they'll find it and they'll pull it. It's increasingly fragmented, right? So people are engaging and consuming and interacting with content on so many different platforms. And it's increasingly localized as well. The old motto of sort of ship it and they'll watch it is no longer working. You can now quantify the total addressable market for any piece of content before it's even released, right? You understand exactly the audiences that it targets and can be hyper-localized in how you target the audiences for that piece of content. So amongst all this chaos, how do we crystallize why content works, right? So if I pull this back up, right, understanding what, how, and why content works. And we agree that content works because of a number of internal factors, characteristics that that content has, as well as a range of environmental factors that also impact it. You know, how much you market it, that's an external factor. That doesn't depend on the TV show. You could have the most amazing TV show on the planet. You put it on a niche platform in the wrong slot, and you never spend any marketing for it, and it might not spread, it might not take off. That's one of the external factors. But there are hundreds of other external factors that combine and interact with the internal genome of the content. So let's look into some of these factors and how we can now quantify them, right? How science and technology are enabling us to quantify them. One, travelability. You may have recently heard Netflix saying that 90% of the viewers of Dark, a German original series, a Netflix German original series, happened outside of Germany, right? A couple nights ago, I logged onto our global demand platform, and true enough, I see a bunch of countries like Russia and Greece and Mexico and the US having more demand for Dark than Dark's home market of Germany. We can now quantify the global travelability of content in ways that we couldn't before. Windowing availability. We've always known this is really important, but we can now, again, quantify it. So for example, what impact does putting a title on a global platform like Netflix have on the popularity of that title in a bunch of markets? So this is a Spanish title, and you can see its popularity in its home market in Spain, and you see when it was available on Netflix on December 1st, 30 days after that, all of these markets, additional countries, the US included, start to take off for it, right? It starts to pick up its popularity. We can now quantify exactly what the impact is of putting a title on a certain platform as opposed to another platform. And making those decisions, whether you should put on platform A or platform B, right? Because all of these are factors impacting success. Platform packaging. This is the total demand of the original series of a bunch of SVOD platforms in the US, excluding Netflix, right? Soon after the release of Star Trek Discovery, CBS All Access had, I can't point on this, but you can see the peak demand on the yellow line. CBS All Access had higher demand, total demand for its original series. They have about 4 original series than every other SVOD platform in the US, excluding Netflix. This includes Amazon and Hulu, who between them each have about 50 original shows, right? Single hits, if programmed right for the right audiences through the right platform, can carry the entire platform. That's packaging it as well. We can now quantify this. The business model, we can see the impact. We can see that titles like Stargate Origins that are available on a niche platform called Stargate Command, despite its availability on niche platform, a $20 one-time fee to access a platform, actually is far more popular than its average genre, including titles that are on much bigger platforms, right? In fact, its availability exclusively through this niche platform hasn't stopped it from traveling really well around the world. So we can now, again, this is the globalized world where it doesn't matter where you put it, people can pull it, right, all around the world. And so we can now, again, quantify this, the global travelability. Franchise demand. So on the left and right of your screen, respectively, you're seeing Star Trek and Stargate titles and the impact of the recent title release on the popularity of a bunch of other titles on the same franchise. They all get a lift from it as well. Again, these are all titles may not be airing, haven't aired for a long time, but we can now quantify the recent demand uptick for these titles. We can assess the health of a franchise. This is the average demand of all DC titles, of the DC franchise, again, in the US. And then we can see the impact of a drop of a bunch of DC titles on the overall health of the franchise in the country over time. Now compare this to the health of the Marvel franchise and the release of various Marvel titles and the impact that they have on the health of the overall franchise. And again, you're seeing a different pattern here where you see that spike and the rapid decline of the full season drop as opposed to the weekly drops that other franchises might have. So assessing the health of the franchise is really important. Content affinity, this is a really cool application now. This is a map of 15 million people's online TV consumption in the US over a 30-day period. Every dot on this chart represents a TV show that was watched. There's 22,000 titles that were watched, 22,000 different TV shows that were watched over the 30-day period. The brighter the dot, the more people watch that TV show. Right? The lines represent propagations. They represent someone watching TV show A and going to TV show B, meaning the brighter the lines, the more people travel, the more people watch both of those shows in respective order. What is the importance of mapping our data this way? Well, we can now start to understand what is mainstream content, what's niche content. We can start to identify relationships between consumers, content, and brands as well, right? We can start to understand the impact, the pull and push impact of individual titles on individual platforms, right? What is the impact of an SVOD platform losing one of their titles through a renewal that hasn't gone through or something, right? What impact does it have on the underlying network of users? We can now map and understand that. We can zoom in and understand, say, a mainstream titles will always be in the middle of the cluster, like Game of Thrones, and find out what the closest TV shows are around it, the closest brands are around it when you're thinking about partnerships and programming and so on. Again, you can have different takes on this. You can understand the relationship between entire portfolios of content, right? When you're thinking about entire carriage deals or partnerships, you can map content in this way. You can zoom in on a specific title, say people watch Stranger Things, and find out like what other types of content are they also interested in. We can be much more granular, hyper granular than this. So we can actually zoom in and say, let's just isolate Netflix titles, have a cluster of just Netflix titles, and through that, we can find out, for example, that Mindhunter is more mainstream than Sense8. All right, let's now isolate just Netflix dramas, right? And then pull out The Crown and find out people who are interested in The Crown, what else are they interested in? We see that, if I see on the screen, people who are interested in The Crown, they also like The Good Wife, tennis, and a healthy dose of Fox News, right? Like, we can now map these relationships. We can go even more granularly and isolate just Netflix dramas with a female skew, right? And understand the affinities around it. So content affinity is an important factor that needs to be quantified and assessed. Marketing effectiveness. So this is really interesting. So thought experiment, 2 TV shows. The first TV show has 1 million people who are aware about it, and the second TV show has 5 million people who are aware about it. But TV show A, the 1 million people who are aware about it, they are expressing 5 times the engagement as the second TV show. Raise your hand if you think the first TV show on the left, which has 1 million people aware about it, is more popular than the second TV show. Raise your hand if you think the second show is more popular. Well, the answer is actually depends who you are, right? This is a trick question. So if you are an SVOD platform and you're thinking about producing content, acquiring content, retaining subscribers, increasing subscribers, the first TV show is more important for you, right? Because that's engagement, that's loyalty. If you're a mass market advertiser or marketer, the second TV show is more important. We can quantify these things now. Marketing spend, work with a lot of brands and agencies and networks who are trying to understand, like in the lead up to a release of a new season, how do I invest my marketing dollars, right? I'm investing in so many different platforms, running campaigns on so many social media platforms and blogs and online and offline. How do I measure all of that? Well, you now have a single metric that looks at all of that and can give you the ROI. So more specifically, right? Like whenever I talk to content teams or marketing teams, like we're getting pitched all the time by ad sales teams from all of these, social platforms and online and offline places as well, saying, come run campaigns with us, come advertise with us. And each of these platforms, they give you the ROI metrics of how your campaign did within their isolated environment. The problem is you can't compare those metrics to your ROI metrics on other environments, through other platforms, right? And so how do you then assess whether you should invest, if you had $10 in marketing, whether you should invest 7 of it on platform A and 3 of it on platform B? How do you make these decisions, which are different on a title-by-title basis and a country-by-country basis as well, right? Because all of these relationships, they're country-specific. People exist on different platforms. They watch different content. There are different cultural nuances on a country-by-country basis. And now you have the tools to measure all of that. So that's what we mean by the science of popularity, right? And we'll have a short conversation about it here with Andy, but that's basically where science meets art. And we are now finally having the tools, the technology, and the data science to catch up and help us quantify what, how, and why content is successful. So that's what we think about where science meets art. I'll leave it at that. Thank you.
Thanks, Ward. Interesting stuff per usual. And I guess you've been out there in the marketplace doing this kind of thing for several years now. If you buy that this data science is completely solid is one thing, but are you getting the sense that people in whether studios, networks, marketers are capable of understanding all this? Because it is a very different way of thinking.
It is a very different way of thinking. Capable, absolutely. I think we have seen that that capability has been more evident more recently because the pressure on them is increasing more recently as well. So some of these tools we have had for 3 years ago, when we first started rolling out the data science platform. But now we're seeing people are actually taking the time, because everyone's busy from their day, to sit down and say, let's understand this. Let's see how I can change some of the ways that I run my processes and campaigns, driven by some of these additional insights.
And obviously the global perspective is interesting. When you step back, do you see that, hey, all markets are alike, or are there very specific dynamics in different regions? Very
specific dynamics in different regions, right? And I think historically, by historically, I mean even 5 years ago, we talked to the networks here in the studios, a lot of them were very much domestic focused, but now you're seeing platforms like Netflix go out and say, well, we have more subscribers internationally than we have in the US. The globalized business worth so much more money now, more than it ever has before. And to really exploit that, you need to understand that the different nuances of each of the different markets. So, quantifying that a German original series that you could produce as a platform like Netflix actually travels really well outside its home markets. You can use it for customer acquisition and retention in other markets outside its home market. But the secret is figuring that out before you even produce the content. That's where the real science comes in.
The dark data point from Netflix was really interesting. Are you seeing more, whether they're streaming services or international broadcasters, coming to you saying, help me figure out what the international audience is? Because I would imagine that's something that companies had no capability of doing, really.
Yeah, absolutely. And in fact, we've seen like the bigger the platforms who it's almost ironic where the people who have the most data are the most data hungry and data driven. That's what we've seen, right? Is that even if you're a large as well platform, you have 120 million subscribers, you're still only seeing what's happening inside your universe, right? You're not seeing content that's not available on your platform. And so getting that holistic view, that's where they come to us for.
Got it. The demand rating or number that you guys compute is filled with so many different things. Are there any one attribute in that mix, I don't know, social chatter or piracy, that you think people underestimate its importance to that demand?
I think they overestimate things like social, certainly, if I flip the question around a little bit, because there's so much noise out there. And sometimes you find like small clusters of fans that, like we go in with marketing teams and they have like a bunch of social media listening tools and so on. And they see like, one of their brands is off the charts. There's so much buzz about it. But oftentimes when you drill into it, you find it's a small group of users that are really loud on those platforms. And so I think to date, the whole thing around social and what that means has been overinflated a little bit, as opposed to, you mentioned like file sharing, for example, where these people aren't going out, like I'm not going out and publicly announcing what I'm pirating, right? But that is a true indication. That is the truest indication of my demand for content. I'm going out of my way doing something that I know is illegal in most places, either because I can't access the content or it's not convenient or for whatever reason. And that's a really important signal that we need to consider that hasn't been today.
But with social, even if it's just, say, a cluster of fans, isn't it important that their engagement is they're talking on a platform where other people who may not have watched the show are listening, therefore it's this free marketing. So I guess I'm surprised that it would be overestimated.
Oh, don't get me wrong. Like I had a slide in there that talked about how content discoverability is changing now, and social is #1 on the thing. So you're absolutely right. Like people discover, that's the #1 online source where people discover content. So from a content discoverability point of view, absolutely you should invest in that and cultivate these communities, right? But from a 360 perspective, going, okay, so there are a group of users who are really loud, and I should free marketing, helps my content get discovered. But what other signals are also out there that I may not be taking into account that may help me make better decisions?
I mean, have you encountered clients where it's like maybe they're following the Nielsen ratings, then you come to them with data, and it's like everything they assumed is wrong. It's so much more complex than what would seem to be the most important metric: who is watching?
Yeah, it's not as in everything they ever thought was wrong. It's, we're not going out to replace any existing metric in the industry, so we certainly don't compete with the linear ratings around the world. And there are different rating providers, right? Like the US has different companies than the UK and so on. But we're not out to compete with those. And so many people think that for all of their inaccuracies and inadequacies, they're still super important because that's your ad sales revenue and so on. But we go in to complete the picture. right? We're going to say, hey, that given TV show, season 2 didn't really perform very well on air. That's not because people aren't watching. It's just because people are consuming it in different ways that isn't being measured by your linear rating provider. So it's completing the pie.
Got it. Want to bring you back to where you started in terms of asking the audience about the most popular content. Like, okay, what's the answer? Or give us just a few examples of, you'd be surprised that X show is actually this massive global thing.
Yeah, so a couple of things. So more recent, the past couple of weeks, I've logged into a platform, I'm seeing SpongeBob SquarePants, crack the top 20 most popular TV shows in the US, interestingly, and a bunch of other English-speaking markets. The really interesting thing that we're seeing on that is actually content that is popular in markets where where it hasn't been designed for these markets, right? For example, there's a Norwegian TV show called Skam, and we were the first to report about 18 months or 2 years ago that Skam was really popular in English-speaking markets, the US included, long before I think Simon Philip picked it up here in the US. Interesting fact, Skam is produced in Norwegian. It doesn't even have English subtitles. It's popular in the US, in the UK, and Australia. It's popular here. It doesn't even have English subtitles. Fans literally create their own what they call fan titles to it. They slap it on top of the video, and they upload it to like the Pirate Bay or wherever, and other fans can enjoy it in their local language. So these are fascinating things we're picking up, where the content, not only is it not available in the US, it's not even available in English. It doesn't even have English subtitles, but fans go around it. That's what I mean by like a global marketplace.
That's crazy. I think where this data could also be very valuable is I think about the way unscripted TV formats are done. It's cracked in one market, and then they sell it 100 times in 100 different places. Has it been helpful for that marketplace?
Yeah, absolutely. In the sense that now you can't, like previously it was a one-for-all formula, right? Like one shoe fits all kind of thing, where as soon as it works here, we're going to take it and we're going to do the 100 versions of it and so on. And it's only like 2 years later that you find out, okay, it didn't really work here, and there. Now you know that in advance, right? Before you make the investment, so you know exactly where it travels well to. So we developed these new metrics called like travelability, where we can assess whether a piece of content travels well to certain areas or not, and where you should take that franchise, and where a successful bet is going to be.
But can you get so granular with travelability that you could talk to, say, a Fremantle or some company that wants to take a format everywhere, and they're able to look at your data and say, okay, we don't have to scrap the concept, we just got to tweak this, tweak that, and does the data get that granular that they can make those kind of tweaks?
And down to like the specific, that's what we mean by the content genome, like down to the specific elements within it, like the type of music they should splash on it. And different music actually works, different music works in different markets. The themes and the moods and the setting and so on. And that's sort of where the AI comes in a little bit here, because there's so much data you're processing, literally trillions of data points around the world, that the question that you're asking is just a high top-line business question. It's like, is this going to work in that market? And if not, what do I need to change to make it work there? Right? And then have the system, have the platform answer it by saying, okay, it's these individual variables within that need to change according to that market.
And when you look at the data globally, do you think that the US market has done an effective job of importing, taking formats from all sorts of different countries, or because we're still in somewhat of a data blind industry that they're not fully taking advantage?
I think more recently that's happening more and more, particularly driven by the larger platforms. You're seeing content being produced on Netflix that wouldn't otherwise get commissioned, through the standard pilot process. And that's where a lot of the data comes in, because they can see that, hey, we're seeing this particular Turkish drama works really well in Turkey, but also we see that from our data, like Turkish drama travels really well to Latin America. And that's a really rich OTT market. And so if you want to succeed there, then there are really cheap Turkish dramas you can acquire and produce to help you travel well in that region.
Okay, there's going to be a run on Turkish dramas, I realize. You've just created that. All right, leave us with, is there any in your data travels, any sort of just totally bizarre, like you wouldn't believe about, the Turkish drama or the Greenland market, or anything interesting that's popped for you?
Honestly, I'm going to go back to the titles that weren't designed for a specific market. You know what you called crazy before? We literally see that every single day on the platform. Like we see that a Romanian original show called Velaya Muta, which is an HBO Europe original production. And there's one of our clients who work with them in Europe, but it's in Romanian, 100%. It's not translated to Spanish. It doesn't have Spanish subtitles, but hugely popular in Spain and a bunch of like Latin American markets, right? And you're like, why would a Romanian drama travel really well to Latin America, right? Veni Vidi Vici is a Swedish original drama by MTG Studios, produced in Sweden. Again, doesn't have like English subtitles or Spanish subtitles. Travels really well to the US and the Latin coast. And so you're seeing all of these, like when you look at it from a globalist perspective and look at travelability, every single day there's an example of that. So it really is crazy.
It is a strange world. Thank God we have your data capabilities.
Thanks,
to guide
Andy.
us.
I'm also thankful for that.
All right, take care, Warren.
All right, thanks, Andy.